Today we're sewing a chair cover set designed specifically for the Aero sewing hydraulic chair. This beginner-friendly project is an easy way to protect your chair, add unique style, and create a more functional sewing space. If you spend hours at your sewing machine like I do, then this project will help you organize your workspace and make your chair feel cozy, functional, and uniquely yours. Hey friend, I'm Jess and I am so happy that you're here. On our channel, we make stylish, functional projects that help build your sewing skills along the way. So if that sounds like your kind of sewing, be sure to subscribe so we can create confidently together. This chair cover set was designed by Audra Hoy Chameson. She has enjoyed her Aero hydraulic sewing chair for years, and in order to keep the upholstery protected and clean, she created this stylish cover with practical features such as pockets and ties. The set includes both a seat cover and a lumbar cover with optional pockets and ties, so you can customize the function to match how you sew. The seat cover finishes at 17.5 inches wide, 4.5 inches high, and 17 inches deep. The lumbar cover finishes at 17 inches wide, 6 inches high, and 4.5 inches deep. This pattern is perfect for upcycling quilt projects or using heavier duty fabrics like canvas, denim, or home decor cottons. These materials provide durability, structure, and comfort for everyday use in your sewing space. You can keep the cover simple and streamlined or add pockets for tools and accessories. For a cohesive sewing room look, I encourage you to coordinate your chair covers with the Sallie Tomato, June, and Martha patterns in matching fabrics. Before we begin, make sure that you've downloaded the chair cover pattern using the link in the description below. You'll find a full supply list, including measurements and cutting instructions on the first page. Once you've chosen your fabrics and cut out your pieces, you're ready to sew. I'll walk you through each step of the construction process so you can take your time and sew with confidence. So let's get started. As you can see, I've already cut out and prepared all of my pieces and gathered the supplies I need for this project. I've pre-quilted each of the pieces so that way my chair cover and lumbar support have a quilted, cozy look. If you'd like to add quilting to your pieces or would like to upcycle a quilt or use pre-quilted fabric, we have some tips to share with you. If you'd like to repurpose an old quilt or a pillow sham, think about keeping the binding intact as much as possible to create an easy finished edge. And of course, you can also shop your stash. Use binding strip cutoffs from quilting projects that you've completed to make your own double fold bias tape. To make your own quilted fabric, create a quilt sandwich by layering a lightweight backing fabric on the bottom and either fleece batting in the middle or a foam, and then layer your main fabric on top. You can use basting spray, safety pins, and sewing clips to keep the layers together and smooth. Once the layers are secured, you can quilt the layers together using a quilting style or design of your choice. Let's review each of the pieces needed for this project. Whenever we begin a new project, we recommend printing the free piece labels from our website. These are reusable labels that you can cut out and clip to each of your pieces as you cut out the pieces for your project, so that way each piece is labeled and easy to grab while you're working on your project. Piece A is the piece for the seat cover. If you'd like to add optional slip pockets to the seat cover, you'll want to cut out to piece B. For the lumbar cover front and back, you will need to cut 2 pieces C, and also piece D for the lumbar gusset. If you'd like to add an optional slip pocket to the lumbar cover, you'll also need to cut out piece E. When considering the material that you'll use for the ties for the seat cover as well as the lumbar cover, you can choose to use non-quilted main fabric or double fold bias tape. Follow along with the cutting instructions and decide whether you want to use your main fabric or the bias tape to cut out the tie pieces. If you choose to use bias tape for the ties, you'll want to make sure to set aside the remaining tape for the binding, which will be used along the edges of the seat cover and the lumbar cover. And finally, you'll need some hook and loop tape if you would like to use it to secure the seat cover ties and the lumbar cover. Once all of your pieces are quilted and cut out and prepped, we will begin with construction of the seat cover. To begin, we'll need to prepare our pieces by finishing each of the raw edges of pieces A and each piece B. You can do so by sewing around all of the outer edges of each piece using a narrow zigzag stitch, or if you have a serger, you can use an overlock stitch to quickly conceal the raw edges. Next, we'll review how to create the optional slip pockets. Begin by taking each piece B, which are the seat cover slip pocket pieces, and bias tape. With right sides up, position the top long edge of each piece B snug to the interior center fold of the bias tape. Use sewing clips to hold the layers together. Then over at the machine, top stitch an 1/8 inch from the double fold edge. Repeat for the remaining piece B. Next, fold and press each piece B short side 1/2 inch to the wrong side. It's really easy to do this with a ruler and chalk. When you double the measurement, so we're going to measure 1 inch in and mark a vertical line. Then, with wrong sides together, fold the raw edge to align with the marked line. This is a quick and easy way to make sure that your hem is accurately positioned. Next, take main fabric piece A, which is the seat cover, and make sure to position it on your work table so that the long edge will be the back and the front of the cover. Refer to the pattern to mark the placement for each of the pocket pieces. You'll simply take your ruler and chalk and measure in from the back edge and mark a line, which will be the placement for each pocket. Then, with right sides facing up, position each pocket according to the pattern, making sure to align the long raw edge of the pocket with each side edge of piece A. One short edge of each pocket should be aligned with your placement mark. Then, over at your sewing machine, top stitch each short slip pocket side in place. You'll want to add a second row of top stitching for reinforcement. It's when working on larger projects like this that I really appreciate all of this workspace that my Arrow sewing cabinet has to offer. There's plenty of room for my project to stay flat while I'm top stitching. And if you'd like to add dividers to your pockets, you can top stitch them as desired. For example, you could simply sew a line through the center of each pocket to divide the long pocket into 2 compartments. Or if you have specific notions in mind that you plan to store in the pockets, you could measure how wide you want each of the compartments to accommodate those notions. Next, create the darts. On the wrong side of main fabric piece A, which is the seat cover, position the dart template, which is included in the pattern, in each front corner. Align the 90-degree edge with your fabric and then trace the angled template sides from edge to edge. Repeat for the other front corner. Then cut out the darts following the marked lines. Then, with right sides together, match the adjacent edges of one dart on piece A and hold the layers together with sewing clips. Sew along the straight edge of the dart with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then repeat the same steps for the remaining dart on piece A. After sewing, we recommend adding a zigzag stitch or overlock the dart seam allowances to help keep the raw edges contained. You'll also want to make sure to press the seam allowance toward the nearest side. This is a great point to test fit the cover on your chair. If you prefer a snug fit, re-sew the dart seams with a wider seam allowance. Next, finish the side and front edges. Take a length of bias tape and unfold the bias tape once. With right sides up, position the side and long front edges of the seat cover snug to the interior center fold of the bias tape. Align the beginning raw end of the bias tape with the raw edge of the seat cover back. Continue positioning all the way around to reach the opposite back edge. And trim any excess bias tape. Then over at the sewing machine, top stitch an 1/8 inch from the double fold edge. Next, create and attach the ties. Skip ahead to step 2 of the instructions if you're using pre-made double fold bias tape. Start by folding each main fabric piece F in half with the wrong sides together, aligning the long raw edges. Press at your ironing station or use a seam roller. Then unfold and fold the long raw edges to the pressed center line with the fabric wrong sides together. Press over at your ironing station or use a seam roller. Then fold in half lengthwise, encasing the long raw edges. Repeat the same process for each of the tie pieces. Then over at the sewing machine, top stitch each piece F 1/8 inch from the double fold edge. With the seat cover facing right side up, position 2 tie ends along the back edge, aligning the raw tie ends even with the raw edge of the seat cover. Refer to the pattern for placement. Make sure that the opposite ends of each tie extend toward the center of the seat cover. And since I'm using canvas, which is thicker than quilt weight cotton for the ties, I'm going to offset the ties so that way they are side by side versus one on top of another, which you would do if you were using bias binding or the quilt weight cotton for your ties. Then top stitch the ties in place, stitching 1/8 inch from each of the raw ends. Next, finish the back edge. Unfold the remaining length of bias tape and press one short end 1/2 inch to the wrong side. Position the right side of the bias tape against the wrong side of the seat cover along the back edge. Align the fold end of the bias tape even with the fold edge of the seat cover. Use sewing clips to hold the layers together. Then, over at the sewing machine, sew the bias tape in place with a seam allowance slightly narrower than the first crease in the bias tape. When you approach the opposite corner, cut the bias tape 1/2 inch longer than the edge of the seat cover and fold the short end 1/2 inch to the wrong side, then realign the long raw edges and continue to sew to the end of the bias tape. After sewing, refold the bias tape, wrapping it over the raw edges of the seat cover. Use sewing clips to hold the layers together. Then on the right side, top stitch 1/8 inch from the bias tape fold edge. The final step of the seat cover assembly is to add the optional hook and loop tape onto each of the tie ends. Be sure to test fit the ties to see where you want to trim them for how long they should be to fit snug around your chair. For this tutorial, I'm not going to trim my ties and leave them long since I plan to tie them instead of using hook and loop tape, but I'll show you the process for how each side of the hook and loop tape gets applied to each tie end. This will allow you to customize the fit of the seat cover with the placement of the hook and loop tape. Shorten the ties into tabs if desired, tucking the tie end under the hook and loop tape. Then top stitch an 1/8 inch from the edge of each hook and loop tape piece. For the next portion of the video, we'll go through the steps on how to construct the lumbar cover. First, we'll shape the pieces. On the wrong side of piece C, which is the lumbar cover front and back, position the corner shaping template included in the pattern in each top corner along the top long edge. Trace along the template curve from edge to edge. Then cut along each marked line. Next, prepare the pieces. Finish all raw edges of main fabric pieces C, D for the gusset, and E with a zigzag stitch or an overlock if using woven fabrics. After stitching around the raw edges, on the wrong side of each piece C, mark the center along the top edge. It's easy to do this by folding the piece in half and marking at the top folded edge. You'll also want to mark the center along each wrong side long edge of piece D, which is the gusset. Unfold each piece and darken the marks if needed. Next, add the optional slip pocket. If you'd like to add a thoughtful slip pocket to the back of your lumbar cover, follow along with the previous steps in the pattern located on page 1 under Optional Create Slip Pocket section. For this section, you'll want to use piece C, which is the lumbar cover back, and piece E, which is the slip pocket. You'll also need a length of bias binding for the top edge of the pocket, and this time you'll position the pocket so it is centered along the bottom long edge of the lumbar cover, making sure the bottom raw edges are even. Next, attach the gusset. With right sides together, match the center marks on piece C and piece D. Then align the top and side edges. To help the gusset lay a little bit more flat around the corners, you can use a scissors and clip into piece D seam allowance. Just be careful not to clip more than 1/8 of an inch. The short edges of the gusset should align with the bottom edge of the front. Then sew the sides and top edges together using 3/8 inch seam allowance, beginning and ending at the front bottom edge. Next, repeat the same process to attach the gusset to piece C back. If the short edges of the gusset don't align with the bottom edge of the front, that's okay. It all depends on the thickness of the material you chose. And trim the gusset ends even with the front and back bottom edges if needed. Then sew the sides and top edges together using 3/8 inch seam allowance. Next, add the optional ties. Follow along with the previous instructions in the pattern on page 2 under section Create and Attach Ties to create 4 lumbar ties. Once they're ready, on the wrong side of each front and back, position 1 tie according to the pattern, measuring in from each gusset seam along the long bottom edge. Align the raw tie ends even with the raw edge of the lumbar cover and have the opposite ends of each tie extend toward the top of the lumbar cover. Baste each of the ties in place, stitching 1/8 inch from the lumbar cover edge. And finally, we'll finish the bottom edge of the lumbar cover. If you're not adding binding to the bottom edge, in case you upcycled a quilt, you can skip ahead to step 4 of the instructions. If you are adding binding, you'll want to start by unfolding the remaining length of the bias tape and press one short end 1/2 inch to the wrong side. Then position the right side of the bias tape against the wrong side of the lumbar cover along the bottom edge. Use a few sewing clips to hold the layers together. Then sew the bias tape in place with a seam allowance that's slightly narrower than the first crease in the bias tape. Continue around the bottom edge. And when you approach the beginning, overlap the binding fold end by about 1 inch and trim the excess. Then continue stitching to fully secure the tail end of the bias tape. Refold the bias tape, wrapping it over the raw edges of the lumbar cover. It's easiest to do this with the lumbar cover turned right side out. Then top stitch the bias tape 1/8 of an inch from the folded edge. Turn the lumbar cover right side out. Finally, if you'd like to add hook and loop tape to the tail ends of each of the ties, follow along with step 6 under Finish Back Edge on pages 2 and 3 of the pattern. Otherwise, you can secure your lumbar cover by tying the ties together. I hope you enjoyed making this chair cover set. It's such a practical project that protects your chair and keeps your essentials within reach. Plus, it helps create a sewing space that feels both intentional and comfortable. I want to say a big thank you to Arrow Sewing for helping us create this beautiful functional studio space. Having a space that's comfortable and efficient truly makes a difference when you're creating. If you want to see how incredible these cabinets are in person, we've added a link to Arrow's website in the description below so you can find a retailer near you. We'd love to see how you customize your project. Share your photos using hashtag SallieTomato and hashtag Arrow Sewing so we can celebrate your creativity. If this tutorial inspired you, we'd love for you to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next project that we share. Thank you so much for sewing with us, and as always, keep sewing and create confidently.